Hey everybody, welcome back to Homesteading Off the Grid and another reading from October Nights, 31 Tales for the Halloween season. Available on Amazon in print and Kindle. The link is in the description box below. If you don't have the money to buy the books, just keep coming by the channel. We're going to read almost all of these. There's a couple that aren't appropriate for either the platform or the channel. Mostly the channel because we like to keep it PG rated. So those stories will not be read. So far there's been 2 of them. And we're on October 16th, so there might be a couple more. So you'll probably hear like 27 of the 31 stories. I'm going to give the backstory briefly to this story. It's a story here October 16th. It's called The Roadrunner. That's where we are. This is one of my favorite stories in the book. It's about 5,000 words long. It wasn't meant to be. It's meant to be about 2,500 words long, but it just kept going and going, and not with unnecessary words, but just with meat and potatoes. A lot of stuff's in the story. And I'm going to tell you the backstory of this by answering a question from one of our long-term, loyal, faithful subscribers, Catitude. It's a very loud tree knock. Make sure to get my 6 and listen for anything. We did a night hunt last night, live streamed it, and we saw and heard some strange stuff up here, so keep your eyes and ears open. I mentioned in a previous video that Bigfoot Sasquatch Files Volume 5 is very much underway. And just this morning, I wrote 2,500 words in that. And I'm going to write another 2,500 words this afternoon after I bring in some wood and cover up some wood because we've got a rain coming. She asked, she said she liked that it was underway because she's excited for it. She said she had no idea how I continue to come up with these stories, but she's glad that I'm due. Well, I can answer that question by giving the backstory to this story, The Roadrunner. And it is simply that. The creative mind never stops working. It never rests. It's both a blessing and a curse. So anyway, it's a very beautiful October afternoon. Doing a little bit early here, doing the reading a little bit early because we do have rain coming. Got to get some stuff taken care of before that happens. And I don't want to sit up here reading in the rain, especially perhaps after dark, especially after what we saw last night. So, with no further ado, October 16, The Roadrunner. I have a long history of running from problems, running from people, and mostly running from myself. The problem is, with the last part especially, is that wherever I go, there I am. Me always seems to get there before I. But I've gotten tired, so I've done something differently for the past few years. I've stayed in one place. I found there was no one or nothing chasing me. The people I'd run from were happy to see me go, and after some pretty serious spiritual discovery, and more than just a little therapy, I found that I'm okay with all of it after all. I also have a history of running in the literal sense. I used to be a competitive distance runner, and one thing I can tell you about distance running is that once a runner, always a runner. There's actually a book somewhat titled on that premise called Once a Runner, which is almost okay. Decent story, middle school level writing, but runners love it, but there's not much literature out there on running. It's a pretty boring sport, really, even if you are the runner. Running is addictive due to the endorphins the brain releases from the pleasure center once you've done it long enough to get in good enough shape to reach that level of a run. It can take up to 45 minutes worth of continuous, nonstop running to get the endorphins to kick in. But once they do, you realize it's worth it. Back in my days of psychiatrist hopping after the war, I had a shrink tell me that I was manic, and that the reason I had been such... Very loud tree knock. That was not gunfire, that was a tree knock. And that the reason I had been such a good runner in my youth was because I was self-medicating with endorphins, and that the proof of this theory was that later in life I do the same with alcohol and drugs. Here, she said, take these medications and it'll fix it all. I got up and left and never went back, and when I got home, I went for a run. I've learned that it's okay to just enjoy running, whether the endorphins are addictive or not, or whether I'm self-medicating some ism or not. I've certainly found that there are worse things out there to self-medicate with, but to be honest, the worst things I've found to medicate with are the drugs that come with prescriptions. But hey, that's legal, so let's all do it, right? Not me. It's taken me nearly half a century, but I've found that the best therapy is a healthy diet, regular exercise, and, if you're fortunate enough to find it, unconditional love, from someone to whom you give unconditional love in return. I've been blessed with a wife and a son who fit this bill. The three of us fit this bill for each other. We complete each other and we support each other like three legs on a stool, and we don't need medication. All the rest, the past, the problems, the people, the toxic relationships that should not have been in the first place and that led nowhere good, unconditional forgiveness. It's the only way. Whether the ghosts of my past ever forgive me unconditionally or not has nothing to do with it, and it's none of my business anyway. But I can assure you that I've forgiven them. And most importantly, I have unconditionally forgiven myself. This recipe has allowed me to stop running in the figurative sense, stay in one place, heal, and be at peace with myself and the world around me. I managed to come to this understanding all in time to not really be able to run so much anymore in the literal sense. You see, after 30 years of doing so, combined with a military stint that saw me jumping out of airplanes and hitting the ground really, really hard, and being strapped down into a gunner's turret as the machine gunner for various massive up-armored military vehicles in Iraq for a year, all while wearing 30 pounds of body armor, has led to what the docs down at the VA call a chronically inflamed, swollen lower lumbar. In layman's terms, I cannot take the pounding. My lower back begins hurting with the first stride I take when I run. It then loosens up and feels okay for about 20 minutes, at which point the pain returns and I must stop, or I may not be able to get out of bed for the rest of the day. No worries. I've found an alternative. Cycling. I've never been too excited about cycling because it's just not the same, and I always worried about cars on the road. I always slow down for cyclists when I'm driving, and I trail them until I have a place that is safe for both me and the cyclist before I pass them, but I also know that not everyone else pays cyclists the same respect. I also remember times as a runner when I had to literally dive out of the road so as not to get hit by cars. Usually aggressive drivers, or in more recent times, people of all ages, both genders, and all racial makeups. Tree knot. And all racial makeups texting or scrolling on social media while driving. I know there are cars that have almost hit me while I've been running and the drivers never even saw me. And I've always feared that if I were on a bike, I would not be able to get out of the road and the car would kill me. Or if I did get out of the road, I'd end up pretty seriously injured. However, I've never been too excited about being fat and unhealthy either. And with the ability to only run for 20 minutes at a time, every 4 or 5 days due to the pain in my back, I finally chose to take up cycling. I refuse to become someone I do not want to be, in this case fat and unhealthy, at the hands of an excuse. This backstory of my athletic background now brings us to the main part of this story, the Roadrunner. And no, it's not me. If you thought that was the case, I can see why, but the Roadrunner in this story is a fat and unhealthy man who appears to be in his early 60s, who not only does not run, but who cannot even walk. I still don't know his name. I refer to him as the Roadrunner because that's what he does. He runs up and down the road all day in his really crappy looking van. It's copper and collar, and I've never seen one as ugly. He used to run up and down the road in a crappy old Ford Explorer that looked like it hadn't been washed since it came off the lot, new, 20 years before, but I guess it finally died in the road somewhere. Ford does stand for Found on Road Dead, and he replaced it with the van. I first started noticing the Roadrunner as soon as my family and I had bought our place out in the country, literally in the middle of nowhere, but fortunately only a half-hour drive into several pretty good-sized towns in pretty much all directions. It's a neat location. If we get burned out going into one town to eat or run errands, we can head the exact opposite way from our middle-of-nowhere location and be in a completely different town that offers the same products and services. I remember distinctly the first time I saw the Roadrunner driving by the house. He was going really slow, and he had his window down, his left arm hanging out with a lit cigarette in his hand. He looked over at me, and I waved at him, and he smiled and waved back. He came back the other way a short time later, and I waved, and he waved back, and I thought nothing of it. But then I saw him coming back about an hour later, same thing. He was smoking, he waved, yada yada, and then a short while later, here he came again. Excuse me. I first thought that perhaps he was just nosy, wondering who the new neighbors were, as I would in time discover he only lived a few miles up the road from us. However, this wasn't the case. I found this out from another guy who lives a mile or so up the road who stopped one day because he was being nosy. Information gatherers, I call them. People who will stop, be friendly, act like they give a crap when you know they don't. They're just trying to get as much info on the new people as they can so they can go running their mouths about them to everyone else, as if they win some sort of prize for obtaining information about the new people first. Bragging rights, maybe. Oh, we shut this information gatherer down quickly, the best way I've learned how. You ask them where they live. You ask them about themselves. Then you tell them you're busy and that you have to get back to work and that you'll stop by and see them at their place sometime, since they were kind enough to stop by and see you at yours. Oh, sure, you get a funny look, but nothing as pleasurable as the look you get 3 or 4 days later when you go to their house, uninvited and unannounced, and try to take up their time talking about them. Trust me, you only have to use this method once and it works. They never come around or bother you out of the blue again. So, my information gatherer never returned after I implemented my method, and he and his wife make sure not to speak to me and my wife at our kids' school out of fear, I believe, that we'll just show up again, and that's how we prefer it. We chose to live in the middle of nowhere where we have no immediate neighbors because we don't want neighbors, period. However, while the information gatherer was standing at the edge of my property with me, where he'd pulled into our long private driveway on the day he'd stopped by to grab his gossip fodder, we saw the Roadrunner drive by, window down, lit cigarette in hand, and he waved at us. "What's that guy's story?" I asked the information gatherer. "Oh," he said, lighting up and smiling, eager to jump at the opportunity to gossip. "Most folks like this man, I believe, in times past were women. But in this day and age, there seems to be a lot of beta males out there playing this role. We call him the Watcher." "Why?" I asked, wondering just where this man's wife kept his balls that she obviously had in a jar. Did she keep that jar in her purse? Or perhaps she'd hidden the jar from him in the attic so he could not sneak it out of her purse and get his balls back. "That's what he does," the beta male said. "He drives up and down the road all day, watching what everyone else is doing." "Why does he do that?" I asked, wondering if this man may actually have female parts inside the pleated pants he was wearing. And not judging if he did. It's just part of the story, okay? "Not sure," beta male said. "I heard he had a stroke a few years back. He can't walk or anything, so he just drives around all day." I said. "Interesting," even though it wasn't. "Okay," I said, "I'm busy as hell and I've got to get back to work. But I'll come by and see you here in a few days." And well, I already told you how that went. As time went by, I came to accept the fact that I might have once been a runner, but now I was merely a guy who cycled a lot and ran occasionally. But it was keeping the middle-aged spread off, so that was all right. For the first couple of years on our property, I biked through all 4 seasons, amazed during the fall of how beautiful the colors were, amazed in winter when the leaves were gone at just how many houses were actually out these old country back roads and could only be seen that time of year because the leaves were gone. Amazed in the spring how beautiful it was to watch everything come to life at an average speed of 12 miles per hour and no windshield. You see so much more when you're on a bicycle than when you're going 50 miles an hour in a vehicle and you have a slab of glass between you and the world. And then in summer, I'd be amazed at how all the green completely hid all of those houses I'd seen in the winter and just how dang hot it gets in Virginia. One hot July morning this past summer, I biked up to the only business in our part of the world, a small convenience store that had been family-owned for more than 90 years. Sadly, the store is now closed, I believe, at the hands of COVID-19. At any rate, I saw the Roadrunner. His van was parked off to the side of the store, and he had his hand extended out the window, and he was holding cash this time, not a cigarette. "Well, if you can get up off your ass and walk, Well, if you can't get up off your butt, okay, and walk, how the heck do you get in your dang vehicle?" I heard a sour, bitter voice say, and the voice was coming from a sour, bitter old man standing only feet away from the Roadrunner's vehicle. I'd seen this man around. He'd dang near run me off the road on my bike on more than one occasion. In my younger years, I would have walked up to him and confronted him and probably whipped his but I've outgrown such foolishness. The bitter old B word, male version of B word, okay, child who doesn't know who his father is, walked off and went into the store, leaving the roadrunner there in the lot by the store alone. I saw an opportunity to say hello for the first time after a few years of always waving and potentially practice a random act of kindness. "Hi," I said, walking over to the roadrunner's van. I told him my name and he told me his, and I asked him if he needed help. He told me that he wanted someone to go into the store and buy him a cup of coffee and the morning paper. He handed me a $5 bill and told me I could keep the change. He explained that he'd had a stroke several years before and that he could walk some, but it was very difficult, and that simply the small amount of physical exertion that was required to get into his van to drive around and then get out of it once he got home was enough to keep him in bed for the rest of the day. "Buddy," I said, "you don't have to explain all that to me. I'll get you what you want, and I'm not keeping your change." I took his money, went into the store, and I bought him his paper and coffee. On my way into the store, the bitter old B word who'd refused to help the roadrunner out was coming out, and he intentionally bumped into me. "There ain't nothing wrong with that man," he said. "He's a milking the system, and you're a helping him do it." And then he got in his truck and drove off. I'd gotten a Gatorade for myself while in the store, and I drank it while the roadrunner had his coffee in his van. It appeared as if simply raising the cup of coffee to his mouth took great effort. His hand shook so much that if he hadn't had a lid on his cup, he definitely would have spilled. We both finished up our drinks, and I jumped on my bike to finish my ride, and he took off to only God knows where to drive his endless loops for as long as he could before going home to sleep away the rest of the day. There is one spot on my favorite bicycle route that absolutely scares the hell out of me. It's a series of kiss your butt turns. They don't seem... Okay, kiss your butt turns that go straight down a mountainside. The spot is absolutely beautiful, and there are views to die for. The problem is that when people drive through these kiss your butt turns, they don't seem to slow down one bit. The turns are so sharp you cannot see around them, and I don't know how many times I've gone through them ever so carefully and ever so slowly and had cars come blazing around the turn from the other direction and completely on my side of the road. There are so many skid marks on the road here, you'd think people would have had enough close calls that they'd slow down, but obviously the close calls meant nothing to them. I was at this particular part of the road when guess who came barreling around the turn from the other direction and on my side of the road? It wasn't the roadrunner, it was the old P word who hadn't helped the roadrunner with a cup of coffee and a morning paper. And I know the son of a bad word saw me because just before he almost smacked into my bike head on, the son of a bad word smiled. I turned at the very last second, deciding to take my chances with the sharp drop-off into oblivion over the side of the hill rather than to take them with the front grille of a Ford F-350 Super Cab, as I didn't think it would be the Ford found on the road dead this time. I learned two things. First, just like in airborne school, where they teach you for 3 weeks how to land properly when hitting the ground after jumping out of a perfectly good airplane, a method called a parachute landing fall, or PLF, and no one ever does a proper PLF after having jumped out of a perfectly good airplane, no matter how greatly they perfected it at ground level and from those stupid 12 feet high platforms where we swung from ropes. No one ever does a proper PLF when flying over the side of a mountain on a mountain bike after having been run off the road by an a-hole in a truck either. Secondly, I learned that those bike helmets, the ones that are very expensive and look so sleek and aerodynamic, yet brittle, are just that. Brittle, because when my head slammed into a tree about halfway down the hill, my helmet shattered and I was knocked the ever-loving F out. Blackness, silence, bright light, man standing over me looking down, looks familiar, stubbled face, dirty, stinks, blackness, silence. Dragged, uphill, steep, big man, stops, thrown over shoulder, bad smell, big man, strong, grabs tree, pulls, my weight on his back, blackness, silence. Bright light, asphalt, flopped on back, head rolls, copper van, crappy, rust bucket, big man, dirty, slide side door open, lifted, lane in van, blackness, silence. Bright lights, men in masks, women in masks, hell, heaven, blackness, silence. "Wakey, wakey, eggs and bakey," the nurse said. "Let's get some solid food in you." "What the F word?" I said. It wouldn't have been my first statement had my mind been working, but I had a hell of a headache, and who in the hell in their 50s says wakey, wakey, eggs and bakey to someone else the same age? I was in the hospital, and that's where I stayed for 2 more nights. The doctor told me for observation, as I'd suffered a hell of a concussion, but miraculously no broken limbs. He said it was important I stay at least 2 more nights so he could keep an eye on my vitals. I'm not a dumbass. I knew that translated to my insurance company would pay the hospital for me to stay for 2 more nights. After that, they'd stop paying, and I would be proclaimed miraculously recovered. The doctor explained to me that I'd been in a bicycling accident. He said I must have been going too fast or something because I flew over the side of a mountain and went headfirst into a tree. I told him that I'd been run off the road by a truck, and he looked down for a minute, thinking, and then he said, and I quote, "You're probably just imagining that. From the hit you took, the police said there were no skid marks where you went over, so it couldn't have been a truck. Surely if someone saw that they were going to hit you, they would have at least hit the brakes." Not that a-hole in that big Ford, obviously. "How did I get here?" I asked. "No one knows, really," the doctor said. "How the hell can no one know?" I asked. "You were lying on the sidewalk in front of the emergency room entrance," he said. "Someone found you and came running in. The medics rushed out to get you, and now here you are." "How did I get to the ER doors?" I asked. "Who knows," the doctor said, and he stood up and left the room without even saying goodbye. I've never lived in fear, and I never will, because living in fear is not living. It is merely existing. It is sitting around, waiting on your turn to die. The very day I got home from the hospital, I started biking again, and I continued to go on my favorite routes, including the one where I'd been run off the road. I would see the roadrunner occasionally, and I'd wave, and he'd always smile and wave back. But if I were to see him parked beside the road somewhere, taking in the beautiful view on the other side of his windshield, or parked down at the old store, I'd try to approach him, but he'd always speed away. It was the strangest thing, as if he didn't want me to ask him what I wanted to ask him. I let it go and went on with life, and thought very little of it, until one day, a few months later, when I was biking through the very turns where I very well could have been killed, I came around the sharpest of the turns, with the steepest drop-off over the mountain just off the side of the road, the very spot where I'd been run off the road only months before, and there sat the roadrunner in his van, and a state police patrol car, and a wrecker. I looked out over the precipice, and man, was it a beautiful view. Here we were, October again, Halloween in the air, as well as the smell of falling leaves, and all was good with the world. And then I saw the Ford F-350 Super Cab being pulled up into view by way of the wrecker. "And you didn't see anyone else out here when you came up on this wreck?" the state police officer was saying to the roadrunner as I drew near. I'd gotten off my bike and left it by the road. "No one but me," the roadrunner said. "A couple cars came by after I called 911, but they didn't stop to gawk. They just kept on going." "And then the ambulance came," the state trooper said. "Yep," the roadrunner said. "Got here just before the wrecker." "Well, what I don't get," the state trooper said, "is why when I go down over that hill, it looks to me like the man was trying to climb up, but someone kept kicking him back down. I saw the footprints, and if no one else was out here, who was it that kept kicking him down the hill?" "You blaming me?" the roadrunner said. "I'm not blaming anyone," the trooper said, "just curious." "Step back," the roadrunner said. The trooper did so, and the roadrunner opened the door of his van. He took one step out of the van, and he fell flat on his face. The trooper and I rushed to aid the roadrunner. "No," he yelled, and slowly and methodically he rose on his own. He first rolled over on his back, and then, by grabbing the bottom of his van, where he was able to reach the floor well due to his open door, he sat up. Slowly and methodically, he pulled himself up, using the van, and he stood. He took one feeble step by way of holding onto the van's door and got right in the trooper's face. "Would you like to show me the footprints? I'll put my foot in them and let's see if they match." "No," the trooper said, and he said it in a voice that let me know he felt like a total a-hole, or total A. He'd been accusing a man who could barely stand, let alone walk, of having walked partway down a very steep hill and then kicking a man I'd soon find out had been a dying man, a man who was now dead, back down over the hill as he was trying to climb back up the road for help after having driven his truck over the mountainside and hit a tree. "I'm sorry," the trooper said. "Just none of it makes sense. I know this man has lived out here his whole life, and I don't see how he could have gone off a road he could drive with his eyes closed. Excessive speed, I said. The trooper looked over at me, and it was the first time, I believe, that he even realized I was there. This guy ran me off the road on my bike at this very spot months ago, I said. I've seen him go through these turns so many times, fishtailing. I know this was probably just a matter of time before happening anyway. The trooper looked at me, and I could tell he was trying to decide whether to believe me or not, and I knew that he did believe me because everything I'd said was true. Well, the trooper said, I'll go inform the family, and I'm not looking forward to it because his wife's as much as a miserable B-word as he was a miserable old other B-word. Hell, she's probably going to be happy about this. The trooper walked over to his squad car and drove off, and the wrecker took off down the road hauling the huge Ford F-350 Super Cab that had nearly killed me months before, which today had killed its owner. Did you? I said, turning toward the Roadrunner, ready to ask him the question I'd been wanting to ask him these past few months. But he was already driving away as well. He had his arm out the window, a lit cigarette in his hand, and I could see his big giant smile in his side view mirror as he waved to me. The end. All right. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this one. It was probably the longest story in the book. We're going on half an hour here, and I haven't really even yapped my jaws much. It's clouding up on me. The rain's coming, so like I said, I got to go haul in that firewood and cover up what's outside so it stays dry. I hope each and every one of you enjoyed this story. I want to thank you for continuing to come back to read them. Again, they're available. You can get it in print for, I think, $14.99 on Amazon in the U.S. Costs vary overseas. I think it's $6.99 on Kindle. I believe everywhere those costs might vary as well. If you've been having a hard time because of COVID-19, or if you just have a hard time financially in general, and you want to continue to hear these stories, keep coming back to the channel, Homesteading Off the Grid, and we'll have more for you next time. See you next time.